The Esoteric Symbology of Primitive Architecture.
Fire, 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 fire.
Greetings, this is Dr. David Roots, Dr. Living Roots. You can find me on Facebook. Please do link up with me. You can find me on YouTube, on the David Roots TV, which you're watching now. Please subscribe and share the video with somebody who you think this also might resonate with. So our reasoning, our topic for today is the esoteric symbology of primitive architecture. So what are we talking about? Well, the pictures already give you an idea of where I'm going with this, which we'll get into as the video progresses. But I'm using the term esoteric, I'm using the term symbology, so we are not looking at the architectural pieces, architectural structures from just a physical point of view. Okay, so for anyone that's into architecture, that's into archaeology, yes, some of those things might come up. I'm not an expert on those things. I can only talk about them in an anecdotal way, in a cursory way. I'm more focused and more thinking about the esoteric symbology behind some of the primitive architectural structures that we are going to be looking at. Okay, and I'm going to take a bit of license in this video because much of what we're looking at and much of what I'm relating it to will be occurring in what we call prehistory. So this was interesting. I was in my research for talking about this video. This concept, the Cradle of Civilization, this is from Wiki. They talked about the Cradle of Civilization, that term. And it's interesting that, you know, it says the place or region in which anything is nurtured or sheltered in its earlier stage. But it's interesting that when they talk about the Cradle of Civilization, they start to mention how it plays a certain role in national mysticism, as well as in esoteric pseudo-history. So they're mentioning two of the terms that I am linking with this, the esoteric nature, as well as the mystic nature, and how it links back to prehistory. So what are we talking about prehistory? So it says the earliest signs of a process leading to sedentary culture can be seen in the Levant as early as 12,000 BC. So the Levant is the Middle East. And so sedentary cultures when people basically settled down, right? And had societies that were based on, you know, settling down and hunting and fishing and gathering in one places. And obviously with that would have come agriculture. But we're talking about prehistory. We're talking about pre-sedentary times for some, in some cases. And prehistory here I've underlined says this is different than historic times because prehistory is before the records of the past began to be kept for the benefit of future generations. So that's what we're trying to take our, that's why I said we're taking some license, because really the time that I'm talking about, the times that I'm talking about go so far back that there's not really, you know, any concrete records on that. So we're just going to use our ancient DNA that's within us, our intuition, and our own feelings, my own feelings, to talk about it. Okay, to talk about these symbols, esoteric symbols of these ancient architectural structures. So let's give a bit of context to that, in terms context to the whole prehistory idea. Well, in terms of modern humans, they found some fossils that they can date to about 300,000 years old of modern humans, so Homo sapiens, right? And that was in, of course, that was in North Africa that they were able to find that. So humans, as modern humans, have been here in this form for the past 300 years, 300,000 years. And you can see here it says KYA, which is thousands of years ago. However, when it comes to now making tools, you can see here that it says there is evidence of stone tools dated back to about 125,000 years ago. This is in Arabia, so that's the Levant area. So 125,000 years ago, there was evidence of these stone tools. So with tools comes obviously culture, because you had to learn how to make those tools and watch people make tools, as well as the tools would have been used for certain things. So as far back as that, we have to understand that humans, would have been having links to higher ideals, aka, okay, I'm going to make a tool, and that tool now becomes a symbol. And so a lot of these things that I'm talking about, I want us to think back to when the first human might have said, oh, I've created this, and I'm going to link this particular symbol with an esoteric meaning to myself as a conscious being. That's what we're talking about, okay? And hence why we're going to use the term license, because there's no way that things like that could be recorded in any real way that could be documented and discovered by science. So let's look at our first architectural symbol, okay? Our architectural structure. And I call it the path, because that's what it is, the path. Now, when we think about paths, we know that humans can form paths when they're walking up and down from one place to another, okay? But we also know that animals form paths as well, especially large animals like elephants in forests. Not just large elephants, not just large animals, but also other animals will form paths as well. And we can think back, we can surmise that these animals and humans would have shared similar food sources, similar water sources. And so they would have probably shared the same paths and been wary of each other, of course. But the path would have been developed not just by the human, but by watching and observing, as well as the human walking up and down, and so on and so on. And with that idea of the path, eventually the human mindset would have said, okay, well, we can create paths purposely on our own to different places, maybe to, a specific food tree, or, that we visit from one season to another. And immediately now, that architectural process, and I call it an architectural process because intent would have had to go into it, and there would have been evidence of construction, which would have been to walk along that path, to construct that path, okay, even if it meant, just walking and stepping on things. There was intent behind that. So immediately now we can consider what type of symbology would have been connected now to the presence of this path, and to the family groups and individual groups that would have been there. At what point would and a human who had that higher mind state to link something that they saw to something that they felt or something that they believed in, and would have said, a path leads you from one place to another. And so the symbology behind it is you can go from one place to another esoterically and mentally and spiritually as well. So up on the right, you'll see me for the various slides that are coming. I will put what I feel is the esoteric symbolic meaning behind the structures. And so a path for me leads to ideas of direction and destination. Here you're going from somewhere to somewhere else. So it's not just a direction, which in modern science terms people will call a vector, but it's also you have a specific destination. Now, not all paths lead to somewhere, but yet, mystically, they actually all do lead to somewhere. Whether that's the place you want to go or not, that's another story. So for me, the path is a very powerful esoteric symbol, spiritual and mystical, and is used in many writings, and many of our sayings, our moral sayings. So somebody might say, don't be led along the wrong path, okay, or don't be led down the wrong path. Here's that direction, down the wrong path, No one really says up the wrong path, but I guess you could say that as well. So direction and destination is the symbology, the esoteric meaning behind the idea of a path. Very powerful if you think about who was the first human to not just apply it from a physical standpoint, but from an esoteric standpoint as well. Because for the animals, they are just probably treading along that path to go from one spot to another. But for a human can take the physical act and the physical, object, structure, not object, but structure, and then separate that into an esoteric meaning as well, which is what we are really trying to look at in this video. So a path, as we said, would have been something that not only humans would have made, but animals would have made as well. So nature also manifests these esoteric symbols for us. Likewise with a door. So a door we normally think of as, a structure that we've built into like a home or a room. However, if we look at some of the archaeological evidence, for example, it says here the Cleopatra cave, there's evidence that humans were living in this particular cave over 135,000 years ago. Okay, so humans occupied this particular cave over 135,000 years ago. So they didn't construct this occupation, but they did occupy it. And every cave, we know, to get into a cave, you must have a door. Okay, and here's another cave over here. The age is over 40,800 years old and has cave art in it. So humans would have been going in and out of these caves before they would have constructed, homes of their own. They would have been going in and out of caves, and with that comes the concept of the door. Concept of an inner chamber versus an outer chamber. When you have an inner chamber, somewhere where you put cave art or where you might store something, or somewhere you can protect yourself from the elements, well, that signifies that there are different dimensions, an inner chamber and an outer chamber. And that door becomes a portal. So for me, the esoteric symbology behind it is this idea of portals. And with portals come dimensions. Entry into a dimension, or entry or exit from a dimension. And we know that the term door has many spiritual, mystic, and esoteric connotations to it. The different writings that might mention, the door. Let's see if I can think of one on the top of my head. So nothing's coming to my head at this time, but I'm sure you're going to be thinking and saying, oh, why didn't he say this, or why didn't he say that? I was trying to think of something from biblical quotes in terms of where they mention doors in terms of like a symbolic sort of way. But the door is definitely a So the door is another ancient architectural structure, not in the way that we're probably thinking of it. So for example, most of the times we think of doors, we're thinking of some sort of structure that a human might have built. I mean, even in nature, we have animals like the bowerbird, which builds a structure and they will go in and out. And so in that, they've now built a door. Okay. But probably even earlier for humans in that regard, you would have had humans here living in caves. So for example, this says over 135,000 years ago, there is evidence of human occupations in this particular cave here, Theopetra cave. And so we're talking about way before sedentary culture, way before people started to build homes. They would have used things like caves, okay, to occupy. And even over here we have some cave art. This is in Spain, over 40,800 years old. Very long time ago, ancient prehistory. And to get into these sacred places, whether it's a sacred place for cave drawing, or it's a sacred place to shelter from the elements, or to store things, or to have some sort of ritual, you would have had to enter through a door. So the concept of the door, even though the humans might not have had constructed it, they would have had this idea of going into somewhere and going through something. So the door represents the concept of this inner chamber and outer chamber. And the door becomes a portal now to different dimensions. The inner chamber, one dimension, the outer chamber, another dimension. Okay? And immediately the esoteric symbology of that is present. So much so that the term door is used in a lot of spiritual writings and mystic writings. I think I put down a few here. This is just from the Bible in King James Version, which obviously some of it, most of this is from the New Testament, but you would have also had some of the Psalms which were from the Old Testament. So basically looking at ancient Aramaic and Hebrew writings. And you can see the term door is used a lot. I know your works, behold, I've set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. Okay, things about knock. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Psalms, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. So very powerful concept, this idea of the door. And we have to, again, I will remind us throughout this, think about that first human that went beyond the physical structure of the door and related that physical structure to something inner for themselves, something mystical, something esoteric, as a symbol. Okay, the idea of the door and how it represents a whole mind shift to saying, okay, I can go into somewhere and come out of somewhere through this particular portal. Very positive and very mystic if you think about that as a symbol, the symbol of the door. The gate is obviously related. In fact, we saw on that this last one here, lift up your heads, O gates. So in this sense, the psalmist was saying he's making the comparison, the link between the heads, meaning a human or a living thing, and gates. Okay, so the gates already is a very powerful symbol, but we have to think how ancient of a symbol and ancient of a structure would have been. So I have a few different varieties here. On the left, you'll see the Maasai, a Maasai corral where they're using acacia thorn branches, and they've made like a paddock, sort of like an enclosure, and they would have used this obviously to keep out the animals at night and to keep their animals in, keep out the predators from getting their animals. And here you have an opening, because if you have this very thorny structure, you need a way to get in and out. So here the Maasai would have built in an opening. So this is a gate. And obviously they would have been doing this. It's very simple but powerful technology. Been doing this for, how many years? Hundreds and hundreds of years. People living in this sort of way. Here we have the moon gate, which is from basically from the East Asian culture, Chinese culture in particular. And the moon gate is very renowned for a symbol of beauty and a symbol of balance. Okay, especially for this keystone that represents, sorry, that's right in the middle, that tends to keep the gate together. Okay, keep the architectural structure together. But you can see this gate is very much, gate and door are definitely related. And I'll talk about that more in a minute. And here we have a gate that's leading into an ancient Egyptian temple. Now this is just part of it. Obviously it's so old that much of the structure has fallen down, might have had wooden beams, or who knows what it would have looked like. But you would have entered into these gates and out of these gates to access the temple. Okay, so gates, you can see, are associated with various things. Here it's associated with a way to get in and out of a protected area. Here it's associated with, a sort of door, to a path, like a dimension almost. Okay, and the same thing here. This is a portal into the temple. So a gate means it's similar to a door. A door tends to be, an opening into an enclosed area, whereas a gate can be more of an opening into an open area. That's the difference. So you have a gate getting you to outer chamber, and then the door takes you into the inner chamber. So we have to think back to the most ancient forms, when people were first building something like this, a gate like this, the Maasai or whoever built the first concept of a gate. And the reason might have been something like this, where they would have been in there hunting for animals. The animals might have went into the thorny bushes, some thorns some branches that might have fallen, and they couldn't get the animals, and they realized, well, we can use this for protection ourselves. And they made, some sort of structure to protect themselves from the animals that they were sheltering from. And hence they needed a place to go in and out, and they would make this is where the formation of a gate would have first arrived. But again, who was the first human then to look at that structure and now apply it symbolically, spiritually, and mentally to things that were not in the physical realm? Hence the term, lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. Okay, here in John 10 it says, to him the gatekeeper opens. Talking about someone keeping the gate, because now that you have a gate, you can have someone who keeps the gate, who stands at the gate, protects the gate. So this is a very important symbol, esoteric symbol. And even today in popular culture, they talk about stargates. A gate to get to the to other parts of the universe might be through a stargate, and they would have to dial in. I can't remember the movie; it'll come to me, but they were dialing in a certain algorithm into the stargate, which would then open up a portal to get through this gate to another dimension. So that's much more the higher science, but how about the ancient science of the gate and what it really means from an esoteric and a mystic level? Again, another very powerful symbol. Each one of these symbols we could do a whole video on and go really deep, but I want to get through the symbols rather than focus on each one individually for an extended period of time. I want to get through a range of these ancient architectural symbols that I feel have very strong esoteric meanings. So related to the door and the window, related to the door and the gate is the structure of the window. Literally from the etymology, wind eye. So here we see an opening in a sort of a rock face, okay? And we can tell by the way the water is, the ocean water, that there's probably going to be lots of wind and rain that would have come through here, made this opening over time that increased, just kept increasing over time. And if someone would have visited this area in ancient times, they would have been able to look through this window. They didn't build it, but they would have been able to look through it and see like this vista in front of them and have that gaze. And please watch my video on the gaze all right, which goes with that gaze, G-A-Z-E. And here on the right hand side, you can see I put a sort of like a picture from an East African typical mud hut, mud home, and you see the clay mud walls, okay, and roof made out of thatching, but no windows. So obviously some structures will have windows, but to have a window means that you need more of an architectural support system to deal with the window. So a lot of more basic living quarters like this won't have a window. It's not necessary. Okay. So who was the first human to transfer this knowledge of looking through something like this and say, you know what, let's put it in to one of our domiciles? We have to think way back and think who was the first one to think and transfer that knowledge using their innovation and their intuition and put a window into the structures that they would use. And then following on from that, who was the person, the human, whether it was one or many, to then connect the idea of the window to what we associate windows with symbolically now, a window into your soul, for example. Literally, windows have to do with this, wind eye. So a window represents the eye, okay? The window represents the eye. And we have to say that that is one of the most powerful primitive architectural structures that can be seen as an esoteric symbol, because it's used in so many cases. I'm sure people will be thinking about different terms now, from whether it's the Bible, whether it's from certain parables, or Eastern mysticism, whatever you resonate with. The concept of the window is a very powerful one. So the window talks about esoterically not only just portals and dimensions, but having a vision into that. Okay, because the window allows you to see in a portal to a different dimension without actually having to be there. A door can be shut or open, whereas a window allows you to see into those dimensions without actually having to go there. Hence why people say the eye is the window to the soul. Okay, really powerful esoteric symbol. The fence. So we're going back to that picture we had of the Maasai acacia thorn fence with the gate. But we can't forget about the fence on the outside as well. Okay? And fence, if we look at the etymology of fence, it comes from the word defense. So a fence, that's what this is. From its ancient times, a fence was used to defend or to fend off. And if you're fending off something, that relates now to the idea of protection. So protection from what? Well, there must be something that's the good versus the bad. Something that's the thesis versus the antithesis, or the antithesis. Yeah? So the fence as a symbol now is now even more advancing the concept of the door and the gate and the window, because now the fence is adding protection. Okay, if it's just a wall, it's just a wall, but the fence, it means protection. It means to defend. And again, for people that are into spiritual literature, we know that the term fence is used frequently as a term when it comes to talking about good versus evil, putting up a fence against the evil things. So we have to think again, because we're taking license and we're going back and thinking back to the most ancient of humans, our ancient ancestors who were pure and unspoiled from a lot of the sort of things that are going on in our world due to modern technology, and how they would have had this fence, and who was the first one to, that first elder that would have communicated a parable or a lesson using the symbol of the fence as an idea of protection and good versus evil. Really powerful symbol as well. And these things we all still use to this day. We're still using doors and gates and paths and windows and fences, although they are the most ancient of technologies. Some might say primitive, but the science behind it is high if you think beyond just the physical structure and think to the themes, the esoteric themes that they represent. Okay, the esoteric themes that are coming from our mindset and now manifesting in a physical form. So much so that we still need them to this day. So we move from now the fence to a wall, and of course now we're getting into more sedentary societies. Of course, when we look at the fence, we look at the door, we're still very far back, because we said in the beginning of the video that, you know, up to 12,000 years ago or more, people were living in sedentary societies. Okay, and the wall now is an evolution then of the fence. The fence meant to defend, and the wall here we see comes from the Latin vallum, and we're saying that others ancient people would have had their own names within their indigenous tongues for these things. Don't think that I'm saying that the you know, Roman and Greek and Indo-European roots of these words are where the truth lies. No, these are just a manifestation of how we relate to these terms today. But we can use it as a base to go back into time, because here we see wall coming from the primitive Indo-European from walso, meaning a post. Okay, so a wall originally would have referred to a row or line of stakes. So almost basically like a fence. Okay, collectively that would have been a fence, but the more solid it became, it now becomes into a wall. And so we see some ancient examples of this. So this is from Skara Brae in Scotland, which is 3000 BC. They've dated it as far back as 3000 BC. Very, very ancient. Okay. Now, if we look at the Pyramid of Djoser, which is one of the more ancient pyramids, so it's not a step pyramid in the sense of the stone blocks. It's still small blocks, but it's a different sort of pyramid than the one of Giza. Nevertheless, you see the time period that this is dating from, about 2600 BC. Okay, so if they were creating this in 2600 BC, then we know that this didn't they just didn't start this, you know, in 2600 BC. The technology and the idea and the concepts of how to create something like this would have had to have been around for generations to get to this level. So while some say this is like, you know, one of the most ancient walls that they can find, my idea, my thought tends to think that within ancient Africa, there were wall structures, large wall structures, and probably not on the level of the pyramid, obviously, that would have been built and obviously either fallen down, or the stone would have been used for other things, or just buried underneath the sand. So we're thinking back again. Okay, what does the wall mean? Well, it meant a barrier, protection, security, moving again with the idea of the fence as an esoteric symbol. To now, not only are you fending off something, but you're also creating a stronger barrier, a security you can't even penetrate. Okay, and that lends itself very well to esoteric and spiritual and mystic symbology, that you can put up a wall, not just a fence, but a wall, you know, to something evil, to something negative, you know, to whether there's negative thoughts, negative people, you know, negative entities, whatever that might be. You can have this wall that's put up. And I'm sure there's so many quotes. Please, in the comment section, put some quotes that relate to these from your favorite spiritual writings or esoteric writings. Okay, so the concept of the wall as a symbol is, again, another powerful one, but it's an extension. You can see this like evolution from gate to door, or from door to gate to wall to fence. Really powerful symbols that have gone way, way back and that we're still dependent on today. Behind me, I have a wall. You know, the technology to build walls is related directly to what we consider civilized development. The stronger you can build your wall, the more civilized we will call you as a society. The Great Wall of China. You know, all it is a wall, but because it's so long and so, you know, so what's the word? It's such a significant physical structure on the land. They call it the Great Wall of China. The Romans were very famous for building walls. So this is more modern, but we're talking about way back, who would have built the first wall as a form of protection. And as I said, we can do videos on these things, just a whole video, but the wall in particular, when I lived in Jamaica, I had the fortune of seeing some of the ancient elders build stone walls with no tools. Well, when I say no tools, no modern tools. So they were using stone and using ley lines, okay, strings in order to make the levels. So the mystics behind that, and the mystics behind the archaeology and the architecture is very powerful. If we think about masonry, masonry is all about the craftsmanship of construction. And the wall in particular, with the cornerstone of the wall being such a very powerful symbol. Okay, the head cornerstone. If we think back to the original first human to develop that concept and then apply it in an esoteric meaning, is very, very powerful. The steps. So when I thought about this one, I really looked for some pictures that related to what I was trying to think about. I'm not talking about modern steps where, you know, someone has created them and so on. I'm talking about steps like here on the right. You will see these steps going down from this rock down to the beach. And you can imagine these look a bit cut, but you can imagine having places where people have walked over centuries, accessing in a community, for example, a certain resource like a beach or an area or whatever. And those footprints, multiple footprints, would have formed steps naturally. They wouldn't have had to be constructed. They would have just formed steps naturally. Okay, that's what I'm talking about. Similar here in the jungle, you're walking down a path and the path would have got slippery, but someone would have noticed that where a root was, the path was a bit stronger, so they would have probably said, you know what, let me lay down some more trees, some branches to make what eventually or essentially would become steps. So we're talking way, way, way back. Who were the first humans to develop this concept, taking something that was seen in nature and then using their own intellect and innovation to develop it as a you know, primitive, ancient architecture. And I use that word primitive not in a negative sense, okay, but more so in an ancient, unadulterated sense that's linked to nature, because that's why they look at primitive as negative, because primitive meaning primate, meaning linked to nature, and things that are linked to nature are seen as non-modern, when really essentially it's just an ancient technology, which are the best technologies anyway, because they don't harm the earth and they don't harm the living things on the earth. So the steps, what does it mean? Well, for someone it would have meant going from one plane to another, you know, from the high to the low or the low to the high. Okay, from a physical perspective, in physics they'll tell you that having steps makes it easier to go from one area to another. Okay, the steps is related to the plane. Okay, the ramp. And a ramp in physics is a tool similar to a pivot. It's a machine. It's a simple machine. If you have an area like this, two areas, one's high and one's low, and you put a slope on it, making a ramp, you've now made a simple machine, a simple technology that will allow you to move against gravity and expend much less energy. Okay, because you're moving gradually rather than one large step. So the step is very powerful because it represents going from a lower plane to a higher plane or reverse. And I put that down to this meaning of transcendence. You can transcend from high to low, or you can descend from high. Sorry, you can transcend from low to high, or you can descend from high to low. Okay? So we have to think about how that manifested for the ancient human, and who would have applied these concept of moving from a low plane to a high plane or high plane to a low plane, the transcendence or descendance to their community through a parable or a story or some sort of relationship, or even just them been looking and meditating themselves and looking at the steps going up somewhere and thinking about, I need to raise up myself, you know. Stairways, you have that term, stairways to heaven. Well, without the stairways, you can't get to heaven. So what are the stairways? What's the path that leads you to the gate, which then leads you to the door, which then leads you to the steps that you have to take to that higher plane of thought, that transcendence? Yes, you might have a window into there, but to get there, to get inside, you need to go to the portals, which we just mentioned. Okay, so you can see the esoteric symbology coming out. And from an architectural point of view, meaning a Masonic architectural point of view, the creation of steps is a very, very high science. It's not just easy to just go out and create steps, especially if you are making them out of wood and you need to go around corners and things like that. There's a mathematical, sacred mathematical principle that's connected to the golden circle, you know, the spiral that we see within nature. The same mathematical principles relate to the steps, because you're basically just going up within that spiral. Okay, so the steps is a really powerful symbol that's used. I'm sure you can think, please leave some comments about when the steps is used in ancient mystical literature. Now, along with the steps, we have the ladder. I mean, really powerful. The ladder is a high symbol. And here I have some of the Congolese people, Twa people, in Central Africa. A lot of them are honey collectors. And so to access the honey from the hives, which can sometimes be high in the tree, they have to climb. And so you see here this elder, this man, this human is climbing using his feet and his hands. But eventually, if there were certain trees, whether they be fruit trees or whatever, and you're climbing, you would start to form little notches in the trees. Or there might be a tree that has natural notches in it that you would prefer to use to get fruits or to get, you know, honey or to hunt or whatever it is you want to do to escape predators. And so that would lead then to the concept of the ladder. And of course, we would have seen, as we moved around and watched nature, we would have seen other organisms using trees in this way. So who was the first now human to say, let me now just also create potentially a ladder for myself? Okay, ladder meaning from the primitive Indo-European to lean. So not the type of ladder we're thinking about now, but a stick that they would have put down that would have allowed them to get up. So what that did was it now gave you a tool to access higher dimensions or lower dimensions. You might have wanted to go to, you know, a water source within a cave or something like that. That ascension, the ladder now represents, like the steps, an ascension into a higher or low dimension. The steps means that there is already structure there for you to ascend or to descend. But the ladder is something now you create to get to that place, or someone gives you to get to that place. Hence the term Jacob's ladder. You know, Jacob's ladder was this structure that he could ascend into heaven within that dream that he had. I'm pretty sure it was about a dream, Jacob's ladder. Okay? And so to climb up that ladder to access higher or lower dimensions is a powerful, powerful esoteric symbol. that I think a lot of us take for granted. So a ladder now represents the vertical, but what if we put it horizontal? If you put it horizontal, you get the bridge, okay? A simple architectural structure, because here is a natural bridge would have formed. This tree would have fell over the river, and someone, our ancient ancestors would have said, well, that's an easier way to cross. But likewise, a human within his intellect would have seen that and said, you know, let's push down a tree across a waterway so that we can stay out of the water, we can stay warm, we can stay away from any predators. And so you get the idea of the bridge, which comes from that root, log or beam. Okay, and here you can see, you know, a bridge in East Asia where the trees have formed a natural root structures. You know, and so this alone, this architectural, natural, living bridge gives a direct message of the esoteric symbology behind it. So the bridge now is connecting. You're connecting one dimension to another, a bridge from one area to another. You know that beautiful song, Bridge Over Troubled Waters. So the bridge, similar to a ladder, but the bridge now has this idea, this concept of allowing you to go from one place to another by avoiding a negative entity, a negative energy. You can pass through, traverse through an area, a concept, a mindset, but not be affected by it because you have a bridge from one area to another, a bridge over troubled water. Okay? Who was the first human to traverse this natural bridge and then create one and then apply it symbolically to a spiritual or esoteric meaning for the benefit of himself or his community? We have to think way, way back and think how powerful that moment what must have been. The bridge. So those were my symbols. We started off with the path. We looked at the door. We then looked at the gate, the window. We also looked at the fence, the wall, the ladder, and the bridge. And I'm sure you might be able to think of your own, and you can leave a comment in the comment section below if you can think of your own. The only thing we have to remember, we're talking about ancient architectural structures that would have been able to be constructed based off of what a human would have already seen in nature, and then how they would have applied that using their intellect and constructed it, and then again moved further to then use their minds and their connection to the universe, to living things, you know, their ESP, you know, the intuition, to connect the structure to now something that's not in the physical universe, aka an esoteric symbol. And what I'll finish with is we have to realize that all of what is in nature is within us and vice versa. And all architecture is really just a copy of what's already in nature. And so hence the term the great architect is used as a synonymous word with, you know, the Almighty, or with the omnipotent power. Okay? And as the great architect, we have been designed with all of these symbols within ourselves. So the windows are our eyes, the doorways are our ears, okay? Our hair, like in our eyelids, are our fence, you know. The bridge, whether that be physically with our, you know, when you're in yoga, you can make a bridge but also the bridge is our mind, a bridge from one area to another. You know, when it talks about the ladder, and we said Jacob's ladder, again, the bridge and the ladder, one is on the horizontal, excuse me, horizontal plane. So that's more of the grounded plane, the ground plane, and the other's on the vertical plane, the ladder, which is more on the plane from the terrestrial to the extraterrestrial. Okay, hence we have our arms as the bridge and our legs and structure as the ladder. Hence Jacob's ladder meant coming up the chakras. Okay, Jacob's ladder is coming up the chakra, and if you can use your chakras, your energy centers, to climb up. So all of these symbols and structures, the esoteric meanings can be applied to us, whether it's protection, whether it's connection, whether it's entry or exit. And we have to know that even when we look at the DNA, which is shaped like a double helix, this ladder, okay, this is why we can use our intuition and our ancient connections to our ancestors and connect not just to our human ancestors, but through nature itself, because we essentially are forming ourselves through nature, through the stars. Science has shown that we are made up of stardust, like literally, physically. So I know this might be out there, but as I said, I'm taking a bit of license. I need a bit of water. So excuse me for the coughing. I'm taking a bit of license to project. Okay? Project and think back to the original man, the earth man and woman, and how they would have connected to nature and allowed nature to instruct them and then teach them lessons that go way and far beyond just the physical lessons they needed to survive. That's it. Moving from survival to now a conscious being, and using the symbols that were around them through nature and through their own selves to make that step. Give thanks. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe. Please share it with someone else that you think may be interested. Please comment below on what you think are terms and phrases and places where we see these symbols being used in an esoteric and a mystical and a spiritual way. I'm Dr. David Roots. Give thanks.
Fire, fire, fire.